noise or pressure comes your way, you are in control. You are steady. But now ask yourself this: why does that feel so far from your reality? Why do your thoughts spin like a storm the moment you close your eyes? Why does your peace disappear the second something doesn't go your way? The truth is harsh. Most people aren't living, they're reacting. Reacting to opinions, reacting to fear, reacting to a life they never consciously built. And every night, they fall asleep to the same anxious voice, and then wonder why nothing ever changes. This is not about sleep. This is about what your mind rehearses in silence. It's about the stories you burn into your subconscious when no one is watching. The Stoics didn't wait for crises to shape their minds. They trained daily, especially in stillness, especially in solitude. So if you're ready to stop drifting, if you're ready to wake up with direction instead of distraction, please subscribe for yourself, for the quiet discipline that builds real freedom, for the life that begins when you finally stop running from your own mind. During the day, it's easy to keep the performance going. You move through the motions, answering calls, replying to texts, doing what's expected, saying what's polite. There's a rhythm to it, a predictable noise that helps you avoid facing what really matters. But when the world goes quiet and the light disappears, all of that control begins to fade. You're no longer distracted by tasks or surrounded by people. You're left with yourself. And suddenly, there's no audience, no one to impress, just you and the silence. That silence, for many people, isn't peaceful. It's loud, it exposes, it reveals the thoughts you buried under daily distractions. It shows you the fears you refused to acknowledge, the regrets you never addressed, the patterns you kept repeating while convincing yourself you'd changed. That's why so many people are afraid of stillness, because stillness tells the truth. But the Stoics didn't run from that. They leaned into it. They understood that discomfort is not a punishment, it's a signal, a mirror, a doorway. You can't grow without seeing where you actually are, and no amount of pretending during the day can change what the night reveals. The moment your head hits the pillow, your mind shows you the life you've really built. Not the one you show others, the one you carry quietly. The conversations you didn't have, the boundaries you didn't set, the moments you said yes when you meant no. These aren't random late-night thoughts. They're your soul trying to speak. And most people try to silence it again by scrolling or numbing or escaping. But the Stoic doesn't escape. They listen. But most people don't get there. They resist the discomfort. They label it as anxiety or insomnia or overthinking. But beneath all those labels is usually one thing: avoidance. Avoiding the moment you have to meet your own mind. Avoiding the consequences of your choices. Avoiding the reality that your life might need to shift in ways you've been postponing for years. And that's what happens when the world sleeps. You face your soul, whether you want to or not, whether you're ready or not. But the beauty of this confrontation is that it's not here to destroy you. It's here to wake you up. Think about how often we hide behind roles. We become the helper, the provider, the hard worker, the one who has it together. But at night, those roles fade, and if you've been too deeply attached to them, what's left behind feels like nothing. That emptiness isn't real, it's just unfamiliar. Beneath all the roles is someone you may not have listened to in a long time, someone whose needs, instincts, emotions, and hopes have been ignored while you played the part. That person deserves your attention, not just once a year during a crisis, but every night. That's what the Stoic practice of reflection is about. Not judgment, not shame, just honest observation. And it's in that quiet practice, done consistently, that you start to feel whole again. Seneca spoke often of time, not as something to spend, but as something to guard. He wrote, "People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing, in which it is right to be stingy. Nighttime reflection is time reclaimed. It's the 1 hour no one can take from you. You don't owe it to your job. You don't owe it to social media. It's yours. And how you use it determines how you show up when the sun rises again." The Stoics used that time to ask simple but piercing questions. Did I live with integrity today? Did I act according to my values or according to fear? What did I avoid and why? These questions don't just clarify your behavior, they reshape your identity, because each night becomes a small reset, not a new version of you, just a more honest one. But the truth is, most people are too tired to reflect. They say, "I don't have the energy," but it's not energy they lack, it's courage. Courage to look at their life and admit what's not working. Courage to admit that comfort has become a cage. Courage to admit they're not as free as they appear. And that courage, ironically, is born in the same place they're avoiding: stillness. You don't become brave by wishing for it. You become brave by facing what scares you. And for many people, that means facing themselves, the thoughts they don't like, the memories they try to suppress, the feelings that feel too much. But avoidance is expensive. It costs peace, it costs clarity, it costs sleep. And the longer you avoid yourself, the heavier the mask becomes. That's why reflection is a discipline, not a mood, not something you do when life feels light, but something you commit to, especially when it's heavy. Epictetus taught that the key to freedom is internal, that your outer world doesn't have to change for you to find peace, but your perception must. And perception is shaped in solitude, not when you're speaking, but when you're silent, not when you're reacting, but when you're reviewing. And when you commit to that silence, not as escape, but as examination, you start to feel stronger. You begin to trust yourself again, not because everything's perfect, but because you're paying attention. There's something sacred about the night, not because it's quiet, but because it's honest. The distractions fade, and what remains is the truth of your inner state. That's not something to run from, it's something to revere, because that space, uncomfortable as it may be, holds every answer you've been searching for. Answers that can't be Googled or asked for or copied from others. Answers that only rise when you've slowed down enough to hear them. But self-knowledge isn't passive. It requires friction. It requires looking at your reactions, your triggers, your silence, your guilt, and not turning away. That kind of knowledge doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you more whole, because it reconnects you to the parts you've tried to forget. And when the world sleeps, you have the rare opportunity to do that without interruption. To sit quietly with yourself and for once not perform, not impress, not strive, just be. But being isn't easy, because we're trained to do, to produce, to achieve, and in the absence of activity, many feel worthless. That belief is a lie, one planted by a culture that confuses productivity with value. But the Stoics never made that mistake. They knew that the most valuable moments were often the quietest, that the soul doesn't grow through applause, it grows through solitude, through quiet courage, through steady observation. And every night offers that exact space. Plato believed the unexamined life is not worth living, but the examined life. That's where meaning lives. That's where purpose is born. That's where all the noise settles into signal. So tonight, if you're restless, don't numb it, listen to it. If your mind won't stop, don't fight it, study it. Because that unrest isn't random, it's not a flaw, it's a message. And if you stay with it long enough, patiently enough, honestly enough, You might just hear what your soul has been trying to say all along. And when you do, everything begins to shift. Not all at once, but steadily. You start making choices that align with who you are, not who you're trying to impress. You say no with less guilt. You slow down without feeling lazy. You stop chasing the approval that never fills you, and you wake up, not just rested, but returned to yourself. That's the gift of Stoicism, not a rigid mindset, not emotionless detachment, but a deeper clarity that begins in the dark and unfolds in the light. You don't need a new morning routine. You need a new relationship with your own silence. You don't need more motivation. You need more truth. And that truth doesn't shout. It whispers when the world sleeps. Listen to it. Let it change you. Let it wake you up. Because that's not the end of your day. It's the beginning of your real life. We often imagine that transformation only arrives through chaos, a breakdown, a betrayal, a massive loss, something big enough to shake the ground beneath us. But real change, the kind that lasts, doesn't need drama. It needs attention, quiet, consistent attention to what's happening inside the space between your thoughts. Because even when you're not speaking, even when you're alone, your mind doesn't pause. It doesn't sleep when you do. It doesn't rest when the world is quiet. It keeps working. It keeps shaping. And the thoughts it turns over in the dark, the stories, the judgments, the whispers of doubt, become the architecture of who you are becoming. This is why the Stoics didn't wait for storms to sharpen their clarity. They trained daily in stillness, not because life was hard, but because the mind is. It's easy to overlook the power of thought because it's invisible. You don't see it in real time, but you feel its effects, how you speak, how you carry yourself, what you tolerate, what you chase, and what you fear. These aren't just personality traits. They're the results of repetitive thoughts that have carved grooves into your inner world. Like water slowly wearing down stone, your mind keeps shaping you. Every thought is a chisel, every belief a blueprint, and most of us go years without ever reviewing the design. We move on autopilot, wondering why we feel tired, disconnected, or lost. But the answer is simple. We've handed over the tools without asking what we're building. Thought is not just reaction, it's creation. What you allow in, especially in silence, becomes what you express without realizing it. The bitterness you never processed shows up in your tone. The insecurity you never challenged guides your decisions. The fear you keep rehearsing shapes your limits. You think it's just a bad mood, a rough day, a personality trait, but it's not. It's your mental construction showing through the cracks. And until you look at the bricks you're stacking, nothing changes. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "It's not events that disturb people, it's their judgments about them." The raw material of life isn't what shapes us, it's the way we think about it. And thought, when left unobserved, becomes a habit. Not all habits are obvious. Some live in how you explain your past. Some hide in how you interpret silence, how you assign meaning to failure, how you react to kindness. Your mind creates patterns, not to trap you, but to protect you. The problem is, if you don't update those patterns, they become walls. What once kept you safe starts keeping you small. A single thought repeated often enough becomes a belief. And beliefs are powerful, not because they're always true, but because we build our identity around them. You start saying, "This is just how I am," when really, it's just how long you've been thinking a certain way. And it's not about forcing positivity or denying pain. The Stoics were realists, not optimists. They didn't believe in ignoring suffering. They believed in meeting it with clarity, in observing it without collapse. That's the discipline, not to silence the mind, but to guide it, to sit with your thinking long enough to recognize what's useful and what's just noise. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He wasn't dismissing pain. He was revealing how often we live inside stories we created, not events that actually happened, the imagined rejection, the assumption of failure, the endless replay of a moment that's already over. These mental habits quietly shape how you see the world, and over time they become your world. There is nothing neutral about thought. Every thought either strengthens your foundation or weakens it. You don't always see it in the moment, but you feel it in how you recover from setbacks, in how you respond to challenge, in how you treat others when no one's watching. It's in the hesitation before taking a risk, in the speed at which you trust, in the way you forgive or don't. All of that is shaped by the narratives you've rehearsed. And here's the hard part. Your mind is always listening to you. It remembers every time you said you weren't enough, every time you believed you were too late, too broken, too behind. It doesn't argue with you, it obeys. And it begins to build you in that image. But it can build something else, something steadier, something deeper. That's the power you have. Not to control every thought that appears, but to choose which ones you give weight to, which ones you feed, which ones you question instead of accept. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's what happens to most people. They live lives shaped by thoughts they've never examined, calling it destiny, when it's really just momentum. And you can feel it in the quiet moments. When the distractions fade and you're left with your mind, you either feel peace or friction. Not because of what's happening around you, but because of what's been happening inside you, unchecked, for days, months, years. That friction is not a flaw, it's feedback. It's your inner world telling you something doesn't align, that something you've believed or repeated no longer fits the person you're trying to become. And you don't need to fix it all at once. You just need to start watching. Start noticing the thought that shows up when things get hard, the thought that whispers right before you speak your truth, the one that questions your worth before you try something new. Notice it, question it, ask where it came from, ask whether it still serves you. Most of them won't. Most of them are echoes from childhood, from past wounds, from voices that were never yours to begin with. But they live in you now, and unless you confront them, they'll shape the life you say you want to escape. This is why stillness matters. It's not about doing nothing. It's about noticing everything. You don't need more information. You need more awareness. Because your mind is already busy. What you have to decide is whether it's building something that serves you or something that's silently tearing you down. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do. But before we do, we think." And that's where the real repetition lives. Not in action, but in thought. Change that, and the rest will follow. But most people don't pause long enough to notice what they're feeding their minds. They consume so much without intention, opinions, fears, distractions, and wonder why they feel exhausted. You can't build a calm mind with chaotic material. You can't construct strength with mental noise. The Stoics trained their perception like a muscle. They didn't just react to life, they shaped how they saw life. That shaping started with discipline in thought, not rigidity, not suppression, just presence. And presence is a decision, a moment-to-moment choice to return to what matters, to let go of what no longer fits, to listen to the thoughts that create peace and challenge the ones that steal it. You won't always get it right, but with practice the space between your thoughts gets wider. The grip of old patterns weakens, and slowly you begin to trust your mind again, not as a trap, but as a tool, not as a critic, but as a guide. Socrates believed that an unexamined life was not worth living, but that doesn't mean a life of constant analysis. It means a life lived with intention, a mind used with care, because what you build mentally becomes your emotional reality, and your emotional reality becomes the energy you carry into every room, every relationship, every decision. Thought is not passive. It creates. It fuels. It either clarifies or distorts, and you get to decide which one it will do. So tonight, as your thoughts rise without distraction, pay attention. Not to control, not to fix, but to understand. What are you building in your silence? What beliefs are you reinforcing by repetition? What identities are being carved out of assumptions that never belonged to you? These are not casual questions. They're foundations, because while the world sleeps, your mind doesn't. It's sculpting. Every word, every reflection, every belief. Layer by layer, it's becoming you. And the beauty is, you can shape it back. You can return to awareness. You can meet your thoughts like a craftsman meets his tools, with precision, with care, and with clarity of purpose. Thought is the sculptor of the soul, and if you stay asleep to that, you'll wake up one day shaped into someone you don't recognize. But if you stay awake, especially when it's hard, you'll begin to build a mind that not only withstands the world, but transforms it from the inside out. Not all at once, but thought by thought, brick by brick, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you're living in a structure you built on purpose. When the lights go out and the noise of the world finally dies down, something raw emerges. The silence doesn't just echo, it reveals. Because there's no applause at midnight, no audience, no metrics to chase, no dopamine from a glowing screen, just you and whatever thoughts decide to stay behind. That's when the masks fall off. That's when your mind stops performing and starts confessing. And in that moment, when there's nothing left to impress and nowhere to run, philosophy becomes something more than a nice idea. It becomes a form of survival. In the quiet, there's no hiding from yourself. During the day, you can drown out discomfort with distraction. You can stay busy enough to forget the parts of yourself you haven't made peace with. But at night, all of that catches up. The conversations you avoided, the boundaries you never set, the regrets you brushed aside. They don't just disappear, they wait for the moment you stop moving, and they return, sometimes softly, sometimes all at once. That's why the night is honest. It doesn't filter your thoughts. It doesn't let you pretend. It gives you a mirror, and it doesn't look away. But that mirror isn't meant to hurt you. It's there to wake you up. It's there to show you what your distractions have been hiding. Most people treat that discomfort like something to escape. But the Stoics saw it differently. They leaned into it. They understood that clarity isn't born in comfort. It's born in confrontation. And not the kind of confrontation that involves shouting or proving a point, but the kind where you sit with your own mind and ask, is this thought helping me? Is this fear still necessary? Is this pain teaching me or trapping me? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary. Seneca once wrote, "The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately." That urgency, that sharp awareness of time, is something you only feel when you're honest with how you're spending your days. Most people live like there will always be more time to heal, to speak, to change, but there won't. And that's what makes the night so revealing. It reminds you that your time is being spent, whether you're awake to it or not. That each thought you entertain at midnight is a vote for the person you'll become in daylight. There is a difference between rest and escape. Rest restores you. Escape delays the inevitable, and many people confuse the two. They stay up late scrolling, numbing, overthinking, convincing themselves they're just unwinding. But the truth is, they're avoiding reflection, because it's easier to feel distracted than it is to feel broken. It's easier to replay a video than to replay a mistake. But the Stoics never promised ease. They promised strength. And strength isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in motivation. It arrives in stillness, in choosing to sit with the discomfort long enough to learn from it. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's exactly what the modern world rewards: avoidance, endless content, endless comparison, endless chasing. But none of it can fill the silence that greets you at night, because no matter how fast you run, your mind keeps up. And eventually, it brings everything you buried back to the surface, not to punish you, but to free you, because the things you avoid don't disappear, they just shape you unconsciously. And what the night does, brutally, honestly, is show you exactly what you've been avoiding. That honesty can feel overwhelming, but it's not your enemy. In fact, it's the most valuable feedback you'll ever receive. It shows you where your energy is leaking, where your thoughts are repeating, where your values and your actions no longer align. And when you meet that honestly without judgment, something shifts. You stop fighting yourself, you start listening, and in that listening, you begin to understand that most of your anxiety isn't about what's happening, it's about what you've been avoiding addressing. This is where philosophy matters most, not when you're reading a quote to look smart, not when you're debating ideas online, but when you're alone, in the dark, and the only voice left is your own. What will that voice say? Will it tear you down? Will it speak like someone who's been neglected? Or will it start to sound like someone who's finally being heard? That's the power of night. It strips away everything artificial. You're not your job. You're not your profile. You're not your performance. You're just a human being asking one terrifyingly simple question. Am I living in a way that feels real? You don't need 1,000 answers. You just need one. One honest answer to one honest question. That's how clarity begins. That's how real change starts. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And what better time to measure that quality than when no one's watching? What you think about in the quiet hours reveals more about your direction than any goal-setting journal ever could. Because you can lie to the world, you can even lie to yourself during the day, but you can't lie to your silence. And that silence, it can become your training ground. Not a place you fear, but a place you return to regroup, to observe, to release. Because once you make peace with your own mind, you stop needing the world to constantly validate it. You stop needing to be seen just to feel worthy. You stop chasing noise to silence the echo inside you, and you begin to anchor in something deeper, something stoic. That your peace is not a product of your environment, but of your discipline. That your clarity is not gifted, but earned. Most people spend their days trying to gain control over others, over outcomes, over perceptions. But the Stoics knew the only real control you have is over yourself, over how you respond to the uncontrollable, over what thoughts you nurture when no one's looking. That's where real power lives, not in applause, but in awareness. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control, and the night is when that truth cuts the deepest. Because it's the hour when everything external fades, and all that's left is you and the way you think. And sometimes that's when you realize that your thinking is the very thing creating your suffering, not the situation, not the past, but the interpretation you've carried for too long, the stories you've told yourself so many times that they feel like facts. But they're not. They're just familiar pain, And you're allowed to rewrite them. You're allowed to grieve and still move forward. You're allowed to hold the truth without letting it define you. You're allowed to be honest without being harsh. There's something sacred about the hours before sleep. They hold a kind of weight that daylight can't replicate, because that's when your subconscious listens the closest. That's when the walls drop. And what you feed your mind in that hour, whether it's fear or forgiveness, resentment or reflection, doesn't just vanish. It plants itself, and it grows, which is why presence matters. Which is why discipline isn't just about routines, it's about what you let live inside you when the world stops asking you to perform. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And while self-knowledge sounds beautiful, the process of getting there is rarely gentle. It requires looking at yourself without excuses, without the need to be right, without the armor you built to survive but forgot to remove. That kind of honesty feels like breaking, but it's not. It's reshaping. It's clearing out everything that isn't truly you so that what's left can breathe. And maybe that's the whole point, that in the absence of applause, you finally hear the truth. That when the performance ends, the healing begins. That when everything falls quiet, you can begin again. Not as who the world asked you to be, but as who you are underneath it all. The night doesn't lie, and if you let it, it can lead you home. Because in the end, it's not about being seen, it's about seeing yourself, your patterns, your choices, your pain, and then choosing, again and again, to meet it with awareness instead of avoidance, with patience instead of panic, with clarity instead of collapse. That's the Stoic way. Not to harden yourself to life, but to deepen your relationship with it. And when the morning comes, you'll rise a little different. Not because everything changed overnight, but because you did. Quietly, honestly, from within. One thought at a time, one truth at a time. And that's a power the world can't take from you. Throughout the day, it's easy to lose yourself in the noise. One mistake, one sharp word, one missed opportunity. And suddenly you start believing that's who you are, that somehow your worst moment defines your entire being. But it doesn't. The truth is, you are not your day. You're not your slip-ups or your silence. You're not the argument you couldn't win or the boundary you failed to set. Those things may live in your memory, but they are not your identity. They're reflections, not definitions. They're not permanent. Their feedback, and what you do with that feedback is what shapes your future. Most people carry the weight of the day into the night without realizing it. They lie down in bed, but their mind doesn't rest. It replays the things they wish they had done, the things they regret saying, the words that hurt, the silence that did more damage than any insult ever could. And they label themselves in that darkness. They whisper, "I'm not enough," or "I always mess it up," without even realizing those whispers are writing their tomorrow. But sleep. Sleep is not a punishment. It's not the end. It's the sacred pause. A chance to breathe between the pages of your life and say, that's not the whole story. What if instead of letting the day define you, you let it inform you? What if you looked at your mistakes not as proof of your inadequacy but as signals? Markers pointing to what still needs healing, not evidence that you're broken. Because the Stoics never taught that we must be flawless. They taught that we must be honest, that we must return to ourselves when we've strayed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. And it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now. That judgment, that's what creates the false self you carry into the night." We are conditioned to think that productivity makes us worthy, that if the day wasn't filled with accomplishments or approval, it was wasted. But that mindset is a trap. Your value isn't something you earn by doing. It's something you recognize by being. being aware, being present, being willing to reflect instead of run. The day is loud, and in that volume, it's easy to misinterpret yourself. That's why the quiet matters. That's why the pause is sacred. Because in the pause, you remember you are not what you achieved today. You are what you choose to learn from it. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That choice begins in how you end your day. You can carry guilt into the night, or you can carry growth. You can replay failure, or you can reframe it. You can either become the voice that breaks you down, or the one that lifts you out. That is the real work. Not proving your worth, but uncovering it beneath the weight of your own self-criticism. And the night, silent, unassuming, is the perfect time to begin that work. There's something powerful in looking back without punishing yourself. To say, yes, I could have handled that better, and then gently add, but I can learn from it now. That's what growth looks like. Not perfection, not pretending, but presence. You don't need to erase the day. You just need to meet it honestly, with all its rough edges and missed marks, and say, this taught me something, because that's all a mistake is, a teacher dressed in discomfort. And if you can hold that discomfort long enough, it becomes direction. So many people try to outrun their reflection. They distract, they numb. They try to bury the day under noise or pleasure or endless scrolling. But the Stoics believed in pausing, in facing, in examining each moment for what it can offer, not what it took away. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that's true, especially at night, because the imagination is strongest in silence. And if you don't direct it towards something meaningful, it will turn against you. It will twist the day into a weapon, but it doesn't have to. You can use that same imagination to see clearly, to forgive deeply, and to step forward gently. It begins with a simple shift. Stop treating the day like a verdict. Treat it like a compass. Let it show you where your thoughts tend to spiral, where your habits are still reactive, where your wounds still need tending. That's not weakness. That's awareness. And awareness is the foundation of any transformation. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And how you react doesn't have to be immediate. It can happen later, in reflection, in stillness, in the soft space between today and tomorrow. When you lie down at night, you're not just resting your body. You're offering your mind a chance to start over. You're stepping into the space between the version of you that stumbled and the version of you that's still being shaped. And that space matters. That's where the rewriting begins. The script you're telling yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. That script isn't fixed. It's constantly evolving. And every night, you get to edit it. You get to say, that part no longer serves me. You get to say, I'm not going to carry that lie into tomorrow. This isn't about denying your flaws. It's about refusing to be imprisoned by them. It's about seeing them clearly, holding them gently, and choosing to grow anyway. It's about choosing progress over punishment. Because no day, no matter how messy, defines the entirety of you. You are the continuity, the observer, the learner. And sleep becomes the threshold where you stop reacting and start rewriting. Where you stop identifying with your struggle and start reconnecting with your strength. That's what the Stoics trained for. Not to avoid failure, but to face it without fear, to treat every experience, good or bad, as material for the soul, to know that who you are is not fixed in a moment, but revealed across a lifetime. And each night, when the world quiets down, you get to ask yourself the most important question: am I closer to the person I want to become? Not perfect, not complete, just closer. That's enough. Because closeness requires intention. It requires noticing. It requires showing up for yourself even when you'd rather hide. So tonight, when the day ends and your thoughts begin to replay, don't fight them, don't silence them, sit with them, listen, and then decide which ones deserve to come with you into tomorrow and which ones don't. You are not your day. You are what you choose to learn from it. You are what you choose to leave behind, and you are what you carry forward with intention and grace. Let the day rest. Let your mind clear. And remind yourself, nothing you did today defines you unless you decide it does. You are the author, and the next page begins in silence. Stillness is often mistaken for peace. But lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, doesn't mean your mind is at rest. Sometimes your body is ready to sleep, but your thoughts keep racing, dragging you through moments you'd rather forget, futures you can't control, and questions that have no clear answers. You close your eyes, but your brain turns louder. Every regret, every worry, every unfinished sentence echoes louder in the dark. That's not rest. That's a war with yourself disguised as stillness. And this is where most people get confused. They think peace will just arrive when the noise outside disappears. They think all they need is a quiet room or a dark night to find clarity. But the truth is, peace isn't passive. Peace doesn't come from the absence of noise. It comes from the ability to remain centered despite it. That kind of peace, the kind the Stoics spoke of, is trained. It's built through effort, not escape. Through awareness, not avoidance. The world outside can go quiet, but if the world inside is still screaming, you won't find sleep. You'll find struggle. You'll lie still, but your thoughts will move like a storm. Every unspoken truth, every unresolved feeling, every conversation you replay in your head will claw its way to the surface. And suddenly, stillness becomes overwhelming. That's because silence doesn't erase unrest, it exposes it. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire while wrestling with personal anguish, once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But that retreat isn't automatic. It's not something you stumble into. You build it. And you build it most when you least feel like doing the work. When you're tired, when you're restless, when your thoughts refuse to settle. That's the real training ground, not the morning meditation or the afternoon walk, but the night, the hour when the body relaxes but the mind rebels. That's where resilience is forged. You don't need more hours of sleep. You need better use of the silence that sleep prepares. Because the night is more than just recovery, it's reflection. It's where you confront the thoughts that hide during the day, the ones you push away with meetings, messages, and movement. But when everything stops, when the lights dim and there's nothing left to distract you, that's when they return. And you have two choices. Let them control you or face them with clarity. That's what happens when we ignore what rises in the silence. We think we're victims of chance, of mood swings, of random anxiety. But often, those emotions are echoes of things we've never looked at directly, thoughts we buried, fears we refused to name. And the night doesn't let them stay hidden. It brings them up, not to hurt you, but to ask you, are you ready to see what's really there? This is why the Stoics didn't fear discomfort. They leaned into it. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they understood what it revealed. Seneca taught, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And one of the greatest ways we waste life is by thinking that stillness is the same as doing nothing. We think lying still, scrolling, numbing, pretending to rest is the same as healing. But true stillness, Stoic stillness, is a deliberate practice. It's not the absence of thought, it's the arrangement of thought. It's taking all the noise and turning it into structure, into truth, into action. And that kind of mental discipline, it doesn't come when things are easy. It comes at night, when your defenses are low, when your mind wanders, when the old fears start whispering again. That's when you decide whether you'll give them control or give them context, whether you'll spiral or step back, whether you'll feed the fear or face it. It's like walking into a mental gym. The weights are heavy: doubt, guilt, memories, unmet expectations. But each time you sit with them instead of running, each time you breathe instead of react, you build something stronger inside. Not fake positivity, not shallow optimism, but grounded strength. A kind of strength that isn't loud or flashy, but holds you upright when everything else feels like it's falling apart. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy, especially when you've spent years letting your mind run wherever it wants, especially when silence feels unfamiliar and scary. But this is where the habit begins, where the muscle builds. You start with one breath, one observation, one moment of naming what you feel without becoming it. You don't have to win every thought. You just have to stop letting every thought win you. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that mastery doesn't happen once. It's a daily choice, a nightly ritual, a commitment to meet your own mind with discipline instead of dread. And you won't always feel like doing it. That's fine. Do it anyway. Do it because the peace you want isn't out there in the world. It's waiting in the middle of the storm inside your head. And the only way to reach it is through deliberate, practiced stillness. Not the kind of stillness that avoids, the kind that engages, the kind that asks, "Why am I reacting this way?" Or, "What belief is this emotion tied to?" Or, "Is this thought even true or just familiar?" That kind of self-questioning turns the night from an enemy into a mirror. And yes, the mirror can be uncomfortable, but it's also liberating, because once you see clearly, you stop carrying what doesn't belong to you. And the best time to know yourself isn't when everything is going well. It's when the noise disappears, when the crowd is gone, when the performance ends. That's when you meet the version of yourself that isn't filtered. And if you dare to meet them honestly, you'll begin to see where your strength is sleeping under the noise. That's what the Stoics knew, that the hardest battle is the one within. And it's not about fighting your mind, it's about training it, treating it like a tool, not a master, guiding it instead of being dragged by it. And that work, it happens in moments like this, late at night, in the dark, in the stillness that isn't actually still, but full of opportunity. So if your thoughts are loud tonight, don't panic. Don't assume something is wrong with you. It might just mean your mind is asking to be heard, not silenced. Maybe the ache you feel isn't a flaw, it's a signal. Maybe the racing thoughts aren't problems, they're unprocessed experiences. And maybe this stillness you've been avoiding is actually the key to everything you've been seeking. The question isn't whether your mind will wander. It will. The question is, will you follow it blindly or will you lead it wisely? Let this night be different. Not another evening of overthinking and over-identifying, but a return to clarity, to presence, to the quiet strength of watching your thoughts without letting them define you. Because you are not your thoughts. You are the one who notices them. You are the stillness underneath them. And that stillness, it's not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about showing up again and again until what once shook you becomes something you can sit with, until the loudest thought no longer has the final word. Until peace becomes your default, not because the world got easier, but because you got stronger. So tonight, take a breath. Let the thoughts come, let them swirl, then let them settle. And in that space, remind yourself, peace is trained, clarity is earned, and the night, with all its silence, is your greatest teacher. Let it teach you how to stay, how to see, and how to finally come home to the stillness that lives within you. It's strange how something as invisible as a thought can shape something as visible as your entire life. We tend to think that our behavior begins when we act, but it doesn't. It begins long before that. In the quiet rehearsal halls of the mind, in the repeated conversations you have with yourself, in the silent dialogues that no one else hears, but guide every move you make. Every fear you replay before you sleep doesn't vanish in the night. It waits for you, it imprints itself. It molds your expectations for tomorrow. Fear rehearsed becomes fear performed. The same goes for resentment, guilt, comparison, shame. Every emotion you replay becomes a loop, and the more you practice it, the more it becomes familiar, then automatic, then unconscious, until eventually you don't even realize that you're not reacting to life. You're reacting to the mental script you wrote long before the moment arrived. And the scary part? Most people never realize they're doing this. They think they're just unlucky, or that life keeps dealing them the same cards. But often, the pattern isn't coming from life. It's coming from the mind's quiet repetitions. Thoughts repeated become grooves, grooves become habits, habits become character, and character becomes fate. That's why it's not exaggeration when someone says, change your thoughts, change your life. Because the rehearsal becomes the reality, and no one understood this better than the Stoics. They didn't tell us to shut off our minds, they told us to sharpen them. They didn't believe in suppressing thoughts, they believed in redirecting them. Because thought isn't the enemy, thought is a tool, and if you don't pick it up with awareness, it will use you instead of serve you. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Notice how the order matters. First, say to yourself. First, think, decide, set the internal compass, then move. Don't wait for the world to tell you what to be. Choose, in the privacy of your own reflection, in the stillness before sleep, in the invisible moment between thought and action. Because the truth is, you are always training your mind. Always. Whether you mean to or not. Every time you let a fear loop replay without challenging it, you reinforce it. Every time you allow regret to dictate your self-worth, you reinforce it. Every time you ruminate over the same problem without shifting perspective, you rehearse powerlessness. And what you rehearse, you perform. This is why the night matters. Why those moments before you sleep carries so much weight. Because your mind doesn't shut off when you close your eyes. It settles into whatever it's been most focused on. If that's worry, you take it into your sleep. If it's self-blame, it colors your dreams. If it's unresolved frustration, it lingers in your nervous system like an unspoken tension. That's why your nights are sacred, not because of what they are, but because of what they prepare you for. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And while he was speaking about generational inheritance, the same applies to ourselves. Because every night, we face the burden of our unlived thoughts, the truths we haven't acted on, the growth we've delayed, the courage we've postponed. And the more we avoid living them in reality, the heavier they become in thought. Eventually, they become ghosts, not of people, but of possibilities. But you can interrupt this. You don't have to be at the mercy of your thoughts. You can shape them with practice. It doesn't require perfection, just presence. Just the decision to not let every thought pass through unfiltered. To meet them at the door and ask, "Are you helping me or hurting me?" And if they're hurting, to challenge them, replace them, reframe them. This is the quiet work of Stoicism. It doesn't always look dramatic. It's not about yelling affirmations or pretending everything is fine. It's about sitting with what's real and then choosing not to build your future from your past. It's about recognizing the difference between a thought that needs to be listened to and one that needs to be let go. Marcus Aurelius put it beautifully when he said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And if you've ever noticed how your entire day can be affected by the mood you woke up in, you've felt this truth. That's not magic. That's your internal dialogue setting the emotional tone before you even step outside. Which means the power lies not in changing the outside first, but in shifting the color of your inner lens. But let's be honest, this isn't easy, especially when you've spent years rehearsing thoughts that only bring you down, especially when negativity feels more natural than hope, especially when your mind has become a playground for worst-case scenarios. But the difficulty of change doesn't make it impossible, it makes it meaningful. The more difficult the pattern, the greater the growth on the other side of it. And change starts small. It starts with noticing, with catching a thought that used to slip by, with pausing long enough to ask, is this true? Or is this just familiar? And from there, you practice. You swap criticism for compassion. You replace rumination with clarity. You stop asking why you're broken and start asking what you're being asked to learn. Most of what disturbs our peace isn't what's happening, but what we imagine might happen. We carry futures that haven't arrived, conversations that haven't occurred, failures that haven't unfolded. And in doing so, we exhaust ourselves before we even begin. But when you catch this pattern, you take your power back. You stop rehearsing pain that hasn't even happened. So, what are you rehearsing when no one's watching? What mental stories are you telling yourself so often that they've become reality, even if they're not true? Because if you're rehearsing fear, your life will move with hesitation. If you're rehearsing bitterness, your relationships will carry resentment. If you're rehearsing defeat, your posture will shrink even before the challenge arrives. But if you start rehearsing strength, even in silence, even in small moments, you'll begin to move differently. It doesn't require massive rewrites overnight. It begins with micro-adjustments, with catching yourself mid-thought and choosing a different line, with choosing not to insult yourself in your head, with replacing "I always mess up" with "I'm learning," with choosing just once to end the day by rehearsing gratitude instead of guilt. Do it once, then again, until it becomes familiar, until it becomes the new default. That's the Stoic mind. It's not emotionless, it's intentional, it's not reactive, it's reflective. It doesn't try to silence thought, it steers it. It treats the mind like a horse to be trained, not a wild animal to be feared. And yes, the wild thoughts still appear, but now you know what to do with them. You are not your first thought. You are what you do with your second. You are not the fear that rises. You are the decision to respond differently. You are not the mistakes you rehearsed. You are the wisdom you gained from interrupting them. So tonight, pay attention. Watch what plays on repeat. Catch the soundtrack of your own inner world. And if you don't like the song, start rewriting it, not with judgment, but with courage. Because every thought you plant tonight becomes the garden you walk through tomorrow. And in that space, between thought and action, between rehearsal and performance, you will find your power, not to control everything, but to choose something better, over and over again, until it's no longer a choice. It's who you are. Let that be the work. Let that be the practice. Let that be the story you write when no one is watching. Somewhere between your last thought and your first yawn, a voice begins speaking. And most people don't even realize it's not their own. That voice, the one that tells you you're not enough, that replays your past mistakes, that whispers what you should have done better, louder than anything you did right, didn't start with you. It was installed by a parent who never healed, a teacher who projected their limitations, a culture that profits off your insecurity, a memory you didn't choose but now live inside. The problem isn't that there's a narrator in your head. The problem is that you've mistaken it for your identity, and without realizing it, you fall asleep each night to commentary written by someone else's fears, someone else's expectations, someone else's pain. And the longer it speaks unchallenged, the more it shapes how you see yourself, not based on truth, but repetition. But what if that voice isn't yours? What if your real voice has been buried under years of internal echoes you never asked for? Most people never stop to ask that. They just continue the performance. They work harder, overcompensate more, numb faster, just to feel like they're catching up to a story that was rigged before it began. But the Stoic doesn't accept this inheritance. The Stoic questions it, dissects it, rewrites it. Because you can't change your life with someone else's narration, you have to write your own. And this is the invisible work that happens at night, the moment where stillness strips away distractions and you're left with what you actually believe about yourself. It's not always comfortable. In fact, that's often when it's most honest. But honesty is the birthplace of power, because when you finally name the voice, you can finally decide if it deserves to stay. And that's the opportunity each night offers, not to escape, but to examine. Because the voice doesn't get quieter when you ignore it. It gets smarter, it adapts, it finds new ways to frame your reflection. It hides behind perfectionism. It wears the mask of being realistic. It pretends to be protecting you from disappointment. But all it's doing is caging your potential in language that sounds responsible. This is why the Stoic doesn't argue with the voice. The Stoic replaces it. And it starts with subtle shifts, not with grand affirmations or self-congratulation, but with simple truth. With the sentence, "I am still becoming." That one thought disarms shame, because shame says, you should have been perfect already, but growth says, you are learning what it means to become whole. And that changes everything, because now you're no longer defined by who you were, you're shaped by what you're becoming. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And that strength begins when you choose your words deliberately, when you stop letting the past speak louder than the present, when you stop treating criticism like prophecy, when you stop mistaking inherited self-doubt for truth." And maybe it doesn't happen all at once. Maybe the first time you try to rewrite the voice, it sounds fake. Maybe the new words feel uncomfortable. That's normal, because anything unfamiliar feels foreign at first. Even kindness to yourself, especially kindness to yourself. But consistency is more important than comfort. You don't rewrite the narrator with volume. You rewrite it with repetition, one line at a time, one phrase at a time, one gentle truth, repeated often enough to slowly crowd out the noise. And the beauty is, the mind listens, it adapts. Just as it internalized doubt, it can internalize dignity. Just as it memorized fear, it can memorize resilience. But you have to feed it better thoughts, not delusions, truths, measured truths, like, "I am not my past, but I am responsible for how I carry it." Like, "I don't owe perfection to be worthy of progress." Like, "I am not broken, I am becoming." The Stoics never denied pain. They just refused to let it narrate their identity. Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." And many of us suffer nightly under words that aren't even real, expectations we never agreed to, standards we never chose, and worst of all, labels that were placed on us by people who never truly saw us. But the voice can change, and it begins with one choice: to interrupt the narrative. It doesn't mean pretending you don't hear it. It means answering it differently. When the voice says, "You always fail," you respond, "I failed, and I learned." When it says, "No one cares," you say, "I care enough to show up." When it whispers, "You're not enough," you reply, "I am growing, and growth takes time." This is not ego. This is ownership. Because it's easier to surrender your identity to the opinions of others than to build one from scratch. But building from scratch is how you reclaim your life. And there's something powerful about doing this at night, about rewriting your story when the world is silent, about choosing new language under the moonlight instead of the spotlight. Because it's not performative. It's personal. It's not curated. It's real. And when you do this long enough, something shifts. The voice begins to mirror your growth instead of your wounds. It begins to reflect your progress, not your panic. It starts to sound like a coach, not a critic, a guide, not a guard. And eventually, it becomes you. Not the past version of you, but the one who's still becoming. And no one says this better than Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. If that's true, then the unexamined narrator is not worth listening to. It's not enough to be alive. You have to be awake to the words guiding you. Otherwise, you'll reach success and feel like a fraud. You'll be loved and feel unworthy. You'll do everything right and still feel like it's wrong, because the voice in your head has not caught up to the truth of your life. So give it new material, feed it evidence of your effort, remind it of your consistency, interrupt it with reality, let it evolve. Because when the voice in your head finally supports your growth instead of sabotaging it, you'll stop feeling like life is a fight. It becomes a journey. Still challenging, yes, but no longer hostile, no longer a war against your own reflection. And maybe that's the most powerful part of this process, that you don't become someone new, you become someone honest, someone aligned, someone who finally sounds like themselves. There's a quiet kind of strength most people never learn, not the strength to hold on, to grip tighter, to endure at all costs. That's the kind we're taught to admire, the fighter, the one who never quits. But there's another kind, so subtle it often goes unnoticed. The strength to let go, the wisdom to release what was never yours to carry, and the grace to do so without bitterness, without resentment, just clarity. Letting go is not the absence of care. It's not detachment from life or people. It's the decision to stop defining your worth by what clings to you or what refuses to. And in the stillness of night, when you lie in bed staring into a ceiling full of thoughts, this becomes painfully obvious. There are things that weigh on you not because they belong to you, but because you haven't yet had the courage to put them down. That's where real indifference begins, not as emptiness, but as refinement. It's not that you stop feeling, it's that you stop leaking energy into what doesn't grow you. You stop watering dead roots. You stop hoping noise will bring clarity, and you start noticing the things that used to own your attention no longer feel like they deserve it. But that shift doesn't come naturally. We're conditioned to chase resolution, to seek closure, to believe that if we just hold on a little longer, things will change. People will understand, circumstances will bend. But more often than not, holding on just keeps us tangled in stories that no longer serve our growth. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. And acceptance doesn't mean apathy, it means seeing clearly. It means recognizing what you've been trying to fix is often not broken. It's simply not yours to repair. And nowhere does this become more important than when you try to fall asleep. Because sleep, in its purest form, is a surrender, not to exhaustion, not to avoidance, but to wisdom, to the quiet knowing that your mind is not meant to wrestle with everything it touches. Some thoughts are meant to pass, some tensions are meant to loosen, some stories are meant to end. The Stoics were never against effort, but they were radically honest about control. Epictetus reminded us, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." Yet most people flip that around. They obsess over what they cannot control and ignore what they can. They chase validation, wrestle with memory, try to rewrite how others see them, and all the while, their inner world becomes a battlefield, a sleepless place of tension and invisible wars. Indifference, as the Stoics meant it, was not disconnection, it was discipline, a chosen focus, a conscious boundary, not building walls, but choosing doors where your energy enters, and more importantly, where it does not. And this choice, this discernment, it's what turns indifference into a virtue, because there's a difference between being numb and being wise. One shuts down to survive, the other opens up selectively to thrive. One avoids pain, the other transforms it. And when you finally understand this difference, your nights start to feel different too. Sleep becomes lighter. The silence becomes kind. The weight lifts, not because the world changed, but because your grip did. That's the shift. That's the turning point. When you start viewing your peace as something worth protecting, not proving. When you stop performing closure and start embodying peace. When you realize you don't have to respond to every thought that arises. Not every tension needs to be resolved by midnight. Not every internal storm is asking for your attention. Some are just passing weather. And you don't have to stand in the rain to prove you can. Holding on is not strength when what you're holding is pulling you under. Strength is the release. Strength is silence. Strength is the unseen decision to protect your peace, even when your pride tells you not to. This is what it means to surrender, not to life, but to truth. To hand over the need to control every outcome. To accept that not every relationship must be repaired. Not every misunderstanding needs an explanation, and not every loss is a failure. Some things fall away because you've outgrown them. Some people disappear because you stop chasing, and some versions of you dissolve quietly in the dark because they were never who you really were. And you can't truly know yourself if you've built your identity around carrying the emotional weight of others. That's not love. That's enmeshment. That's not loyalty. That's self-neglect. And you can let go of that, not with anger, but with awareness, with respect for your own journey. Because what you choose to carry shapes who you become. If your hands are always full of regret, you won't have space to build something better. If your mind is occupied by proving your worth to people who can't see you clearly, you'll forget to see yourself. And if your heart is always chasing closure in places that only echo, you'll confuse exhaustion for progress. So tonight, ask yourself, what am I still holding that doesn't belong to me? What thought keeps running that never actually serves me? What pain have I mistaken for identity? And what belief, if I let it go, would free me? You don't have to have all the answers. You just need the willingness to ask better questions. And that's the beginning of change. Not grand resolutions, but subtle shifts in awareness. The decision to stop fueling the same internal battles. The courage to soften your grip. The grace to leave things unresolved, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough not to need resolution to rest. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And craving certainty, craving control, craving constant reassurance, that's a kind of poverty too. It empties your spirit while pretending to protect it. But you can walk away from that. You can go to sleep tonight and say, "I did what I could. I showed up as best I knew how, and now I let it go." This is the quiet revolution of the Stoic. Not to rise above pain, but to walk through it cleanly. Not to suppress emotion, but to understand it, to organize it, to channel it. Not to pretend the world doesn't affect you, but to choose how deeply it gets in. And yes, that might look like indifference from the outside, but from within, it feels like peace. It feels like still water. It feels like being able to breathe again, not because everything is okay, but because you are. That's the goal. Not perfection, not numbness, but clarity, calm, knowing what to respond to and what to release, knowing when to speak and when silence says more, knowing what to protect and knowing what to let go of with quiet dignity. So when your head hits the pillow tonight, don't fight yourself. Don't replay the same loops. Don't pick up what tomorrow hasn't asked for yet. Just breathe, just listen, and just surrender, not as defeat, but as devotion to your own growth. Some wounds don't scream, they whisper. They murmur in the quiet moments, replaying themselves not as events, but as narratives. Stories you keep reliving, sometimes without even realizing it. And those stories, left unexamined, don't just disappear when the day ends. They evolve, they shape your thoughts, they haunt your body, and they echo when the world is silent. Pain that isn't looked at doesn't sleep. It paces in your mind, disguising itself as restlessness, irritability, even fatigue. But beneath all that is a memory asking for attention. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a breakdown, just your awareness, just your presence. The gentle willingness to turn inward and say, I see you. Let's look at this together. Most people never question what drives them. They just react, defend, avoid. But you can't heal what you never name. You can't grow beyond what you won't face. And the night, the still hours before sleep, is when you have that chance. Not to fix everything, but to notice, to sit with what's stirring under the surface. Because healing isn't loud, it isn't linear. It's not a milestone you cross, but a pattern you disrupt. A whisper you finally hear, a narrative you begin to question. And it starts, not with answers, but with awareness, with slowing down enough to say, what am I really feeling? What's underneath this tension? What's asking for attention in me, not from others, not from the world, but from me? That's a radical shift. Most people spend their lives trying to escape themselves, through distraction, through blame, through endless busyness. But the moment you stop running, you realize something profound. Pain that's witnessed without resistance begins to soften. It no longer needs to shout. It no longer needs to pull your strings from the shadows. It begins, ever so gently, to dissolve. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. He wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. It's not the past that binds us. It's the meaning we've never questioned, the interpretation we accepted as truth. And when you reflect, not obsessively but honestly, you begin to see the difference between what happened and what you've carried from it. This is not about invalidating pain. It's about reclaiming your relationship with it. Because pain that rules you will limit you. But pain that teaches you will transform you. When you become curious about your own responses, your own patterns, your own silence, that's when the healing begins. Not when someone else apologizes. Not when justice is served. But when you stop hiding from yourself. That's the secret most people miss. Healing isn't always about closure. It's about clarity. The clarity to see that your worth isn't tied to what you endured. The clarity to stop performing strength and start practicing truth. The clarity to say, this happened. It shaped me, but it doesn't define me. And that clarity only comes through awareness, not judgment, not shame, just presence. And when you're unaware, you live inside imagined futures and recycled pasts. But when you pause to reflect without clinging, you begin to unlearn. You start to understand which voices are yours and which were planted by pain. You stop repeating patterns just because they feel familiar, and you begin, slowly, steadily, to make new choices. That's the hidden power of nighttime. The world quiets down, the distractions fade, and you're left with yourself. Not your job, not your identity, just you. And while that can feel confronting, it's also sacred. Because in that quiet, you meet your truth without interruption. You hear your pain clearly, and if you're willing, you listen. Not to amplify it, but to understand it. This is the practice of the Stoic. Not suppression, but refinement. The Stoic doesn't pretend pain doesn't exist. They just refuse to let it own them. They hold space for it. They ask, "What is this teaching me?" And they listen. They sit with discomfort, not to be martyrs, but to be free. Because on the other side of awareness is peace, not the kind you perform, but the kind you become. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." So what if your view has been clouded by fear, by shame, by an old story you never updated? Then the work isn't to fight the pain. It's to clean the lens, to become aware of what you're seeing and why, and in doing so, to reclaim your ability to choose a new frame, a new story, a new direction. But let's be honest, awareness is not always comforting. Sometimes it hurts more before it helps. Sometimes it feels like regression. You uncover things you thought you'd buried for good. You feel emotions you don't want to admit. You realize truths that upend your identity. And that's okay. Because you are not breaking, you are unfolding, you are not going backwards, you are going deeper. But real rest doesn't come from escape. It comes from alignment, from being honest enough to face your own inner landscape and kind enough to walk through it without criticism. That's when the mind begins to soften. That's when the body begins to release. That's when the past begins to feel like a place you came from, not a place you still live in. And the truth is, most of the things you want in life, peace, clarity, confidence, aren't waiting on some external milestone. They're waiting on your presence, your attention, your willingness to turn inward and say, "What am I carrying that's asking to be seen?" Because every unexamined emotion becomes a reaction, every unhealed memory becomes a trigger, every suppressed truth becomes a wall between you and your potential. But when you choose to reflect, not obsess, but reflect with curiosity and compassion, something begins to shift. You stop identifying with your pain. You start observing it. You stop clinging to the version of you who needed to survive. You start making room for the one who's ready to live. Not perfectly, not pain-free, but consciously. And that's enough. That's the beginning. The quiet decision to stop running from yourself, to turn toward the parts of you that ache and whisper and loop, and to say, "I'm here, I'm listening." No judgment, no timeline, just awareness. Because healing happens in proportion to it. The more you see, the more you heal. The more you accept, the more you transform. The more you stop fighting your inner world, the more space you create for a new one to grow. So tonight, before you close your eyes, ask yourself, not harshly, but gently, what part of me is asking to be seen? Then listen, not for answers, but for honesty. Let the silence speak. Let the feelings rise. Let the old narrative surface, not to punish you, but to free you. This is what it means to heal. Not to erase what's been, but to reclaim who you are beyond it. To become someone who doesn't just survive their past, but rises from it with eyes wide open, heart open wider, and a mind that's done hiding. And when you wake tomorrow, you'll feel it. Not all at once, but in small, quiet ways. The breath that feels lighter, the thought that's no longer there, the peace that meets you before the noise does. You're not healing by accident. you're healing by awareness. And that changes everything. There's a heaviness that doesn't show on the outside. You can laugh, you can work, you can function, but it lingers, like something unfinished, like a knot in your chest you can't quite explain. Most people call it bitterness, some call it pride, but deep down, it's often just unforgiveness. Not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet resistance to let go. And yet every grudge, every unresolved emotion carries weight, not on others, on you. Forgiveness isn't easy. Not because we don't want peace, but because part of us still thinks holding on gives us something: control, protection, power. But what it actually gives us is friction, tension between who we are and who we could be if we were no longer trapped in that moment, that betrayal, that hurt, that echo of disrespect that keeps replaying like a scratch on a record. And at night, when everything slows down, it comes back. The grudge, the resentment, the replay of what they did or didn't do. It sits in the body, weighs on the breath, and steals the stillness that should be yours. Forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about deciding that what happened no longer controls you. It's a conscious severing of the invisible thread that tethers your growth to another person's behavior. The Stoics knew this. They didn't practice forgiveness as a moral virtue, but as a strategy of liberation. To be unbothered by the injustice of others is not weakness, it's mastery. Because when your emotions are dictated by those who harmed you, you're still under their influence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." That's the essence. Not to mirror their bitterness, not to become cold in response to cruelty, but to rise above it. Not with superiority, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that comes from knowing that your inner world is yours, not theirs to damage, and certainly not theirs to dominate. But here's the part that people often avoid. Forgiving others is often easier than forgiving yourself. It's easy to ruminate on how someone wronged you. It's much harder to face the part of you that tolerated it, the signs you ignored, the words you silenced, the boundaries you didn't hold. That's where the real forgiveness work begins, not outward, but inward. That's why grudges are so tricky. They're not always about others. Sometimes they're just mirrors, reminders of who we used to be and how we wish we had acted differently. And the mind, being what it is, turns that regret into a loop, a punishment, a reason to keep replaying the past as a way to feel like we're learning from it. But the truth is, you don't learn by suffering. You learn by seeing, clearly, without distortion, without the fog of shame. And then, only then, can you forgive yourself with the same grace you wish others would show you. Seneca once said, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." That's what we often forget. The injury happened once. The anger lives every day. It carves itself into your tone. It hijacks your sleep. It twists your memories. And it pretends to be strength when really it's fear. Fear that if you let go, you'll be vulnerable again. But letting go isn't vulnerability. It's command. Command over your own nervous system. Command over your own energy. It's not about forgetting what they did. It's about remembering who you are without the burden. Because that's what unforgiveness becomes. A burden. You carry it like armor, thinking it protects you. But eventually it just weighs you down. You start expecting betrayal where there's none. You misinterpret words. You assume people's motives. You become reactive, guarded, even cynical, not because you want to be, but because something in you is still bracing for a blow that already happened. Forgiveness is the process of unbracing, of softening, of allowing yourself to breathe again without the past tensing your shoulders. And it takes time. Not because forgiveness is slow, but because self-protection is stubborn. Your brain learned to defend. Your heart learned to anticipate pain. So to forgive is to teach yourself a new rhythm, one that doesn't rely on tension to feel safe. That's why reflection matters. Not rumination, but reflection. The kind where you sit quietly with your story and ask, what have I been carrying? Who am I still fighting in my head long after the battle ended? And most importantly, what part of me is ready to stop? Not because it's easy, but because it's time. Most people react unconsciously. They let pain shape their personality. They let disappointment mold their expectations. They build identities out of survival. But when you reflect, you create space between the stimulus and the story, between what hurt you and what you become because of it. And in that space, that's where choice lives, the choice to let go, to stop rehearsing conversations that never happened, to stop waiting for someone to understand the pain they caused, to stop needing revenge, justice, or validation, and to say, I choose peace, I choose freedom, I choose to unhook myself from this storyline and rewrite the next chapter. Forgiveness is not the final chapter. It's the turning point. The moment you decide that your future deserves more than your past ever gave you, that your energy is too valuable to be chained to what's already over, and that your soul can finally exhale, not because everything is resolved, but because you no longer need it to be. This is the soul of Stoicism. It's not cold detachment, it's practiced release, a recognition that clinging to offense is like holding burning coal, hoping the other person gets hurt. In letting go, you don't lose anything. You reclaim everything: your peace, your time, your clarity, your dignity. Plato said, "The highest form of justice is forgiveness." Not because justice and forgiveness are the same, but because sometimes justice in the world doesn't come, and in those moments, forgiveness becomes the higher act. Not to fix the world, but to heal your own, to give yourself the justice of emotional freedom, to break the cycle, to interrupt the legacy of pain passed down through generations, relationships, and inner narratives. So tonight, before you fall asleep, take inventory, not with guilt, but with honesty. Who are you still mentally arguing with? What event still replays in your head, even after all this time? Where does your body tighten when you remember? And most importantly, are you ready to be free? Because forgiveness doesn't mean it didn't matter. It means you matter too much to keep bleeding for it. It means you're done auditioning for peace and ready to embody it. It means you stop asking the past to explain itself and start deciding what the future will feel like in your own nervous system. So breathe, feel it, let the pain speak, then thank it, and let it go. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because it's done hurting you. Because you've outgrown the part of yourself that needed to keep fighting. And because peace is not something you find, it's something you allow. When the war inside you ends. And now, maybe for the first time in a long time, you can rest. Not because everything's perfect, but because you're no longer trying to control what already happened. You're no longer dragging old battles into new days. You're no longer shrinking your joy to stay loyal to your pain. You forgive, you release, and you walk away lighter. That's not weakness, that's power. There's a part of your mind that never sleeps. While your body rests, while your conscious thoughts dissolve into dreams, the unconscious keeps running. Quiet, relentless, always listening. And this is where most people underestimate their own power. They think sleep is just escape, a passive reset, a mental fog. But for the Stoic, sleep isn't where you disconnect. It's where you align, where you begin the deeper work that shapes the way you show up in life. The mind absorbs what it's fed, whether you're aware of it or not. You may think the day ends when your eyes close, but it doesn't. Everything you consumed, every argument you didn't resolve, every fear you didn't examine, every thought you buried, it all lingers. And in the stillness of night, when the distractions fall away, the unconscious mind becomes fertile ground. The question is, what seeds are you planting? Most people go to bed in chaos, their breath shallow, their body tense, their mind spinning on autopilot. They fall asleep to the background noise of regrets, assumptions, and unfinished loops. And then they wake up wondering why they feel anxious, why they feel lost, why their confidence is brittle. The answer is simple. Their unconscious is untrained. It reacts, it copies, it loops, it doesn't lead. But it can be trained, like a warrior, like someone who doesn't just live, but lives with inner command. Most of what feels like fate is just unexamined belief, inherited fear, a mental program that was never chosen, just absorbed. And the training begins not with more effort, but with awareness. Awareness of what you've been feeding the mind when no one is watching. The late-night self-talk, the media you scroll through before sleep, the emotions you never name. These things don't vanish, they imprint. So what if, instead of ending the day in disarray, you closed your eyes in discipline? Not rigid, not anxious, but deliberate. Like a mental athlete stepping into the gym, like a warrior entering stillness not for escape, but for alignment. That's the true Stoic practice. Not resisting thought, but refining it. Not forcing sleep, but preparing for it like a ritual of return to truth, to clarity, to yourself. Imagine entering sleep with the same care that a soldier prepares for battle, not tense, but ready. Ready to guard what enters, ready to protect what stays, ready to release what no longer serves. That's how the unconscious becomes an ally, not a saboteur, not by accident, but by design. That's what it means to train the unconscious, to guide it, gently but firmly, away from chaos and toward clarity. Not by erasing thought, but by leading it back to truth. And the truth is simple. You are not powerless. You are not broken. You are not what happened to you. But you do become what you repeatedly focus on. And most people focus on pain, on doubt, on conflict. Not because they want to, but because they never learned how to lead their mind when the lights are off and the world goes quiet. They rely on distraction to avoid discomfort. But at night, distraction fades, and the only thing left is your mental conditioning, or lack of it. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And reaction isn't just what happens in daylight. It happens in your dreams, in your tensions, in your instincts. And all of those are shaped by the unconscious. If you don't direct it, it defaults to habit, to fear, to survival. But if you do, if you prepare it, you begin to react differently, even when you're not thinking. You become resilient, not by trying harder, but by reprogramming deeper. This isn't about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about building a mental landscape where you can navigate difficulty without crumbling, where your emotions don't own you, where your past doesn't haunt you, where your mind becomes a place of strength, even when your circumstances aren't. But that kind of strength doesn't show up by accident. It's built in the quiet. It's built in the moments where you want to check out, but choose to check in instead. It's built when you take 5 minutes before sleep to scan your body, to breathe deeper, to replace the inner critic with a calmer narrator. One who says, yes, today was heavy, but I am still whole. Yes, mistakes were made, but I am still worthy. Yes, the future is unknown, but I am still in command of how I meet it. And here's the truth most people avoid. Your unconscious beliefs leak into your behavior. Not always through words, but through energy, through your posture, your tone, your silence. That's why this work matters. It's not theoretical, it's not spiritual fluff, it's psychological precision, mental discipline, and emotional hygiene. Because when you learn to train the mind to sleep in alignment, you wake up differently. Not just rested, but rooted. Not just recharged, but recentered. And that subtle difference becomes a massive one over time. You're not so reactive. You're not so scattered. You're not so desperate for noise, validation, or control. You've built something within you, something calm, something steady, something no one else can take away. So the next time you lie down, ask yourself, is my mind my ally or my adversary? Am I feeding it with fears or with focus? Am I letting it wander into the dark, or am I guiding it toward light, even if it's just a flicker? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be enlightened. You just have to care. Care enough to pause, to listen, to lead. Because when you lead your unconscious with intention, it begins to lead you back, with clarity, with vision, with strength. This is the nightly battlefield most people never enter. Not because they don't want peace, but because they don't realize peace takes preparation. Sleep is not an escape. It's a frontier, and the warrior of the mind does not go into it unarmed. You carry your breath, your values, your inner voice. You rehearse truth, not fear. You rest not in weakness, but in wisdom. And when you wake different, not lighter by accident, but because the war inside you was not ignored. It was met, not with force, but with focus, not with fear, but with philosophy. And in that space between chaos and control, you become something rare, a person who doesn't just survive their nights, but who trains them, shapes them, uses them as a forge. You become a quiet warrior, one who understands that even in sleep, the mind is building. So why not build it well? The day asks for motion. It pulls at you with responsibility, reaction, conversation, effort. It's loud. It's urgent. You move from task to task, answering questions, solving problems, navigating people. In that chaos, reflection doesn't always fit. There's no space to pause when you're in the middle of becoming. But when the sun sets and the noise dies down, something sacred opens. A quieter world begins. One that doesn't demand speed, but stillness. One that doesn't demand answers, but presence. And it's in that stillness, not the action, that you start to see clearly. Because the night doesn't belong to reaction, it belongs to review. Reflection isn't always comfortable, but it's honest, and that's what makes it powerful. It doesn't try to fix everything all at once. It simply holds up a mirror and says, "Look again." And when you do, without judgment, without shame, you start to notice things you missed in the rush. That sharp tone you used with someone you care about. That opportunity you ignored out of fear. That belief you carried that doesn't belong to you anymore. In the quiet of night, these things rise to the surface, not to punish you, but to be seen, acknowledged, and refined. It's tempting to avoid these moments, to drown them in screens, noise, distraction, because true reflection requires courage, not the kind that fights battles outside, but the kind that faces truth within. Most people react more than they reflect. They live on autopilot. They do things they don't understand, say things they regret, carry pain they never examine. And then they wonder why life feels heavy or confusing or out of control. But here's the reality. Without reflection, there is no clarity. Without clarity, there is no direction. And without direction, reaction becomes the default. You don't choose your life. You just relive old patterns with new faces. But when you take time to look back on the day, not to criticize but to understand, you give yourself the rare chance to grow on purpose. You're not blindly moving forward. You're learning. You're integrating. You're evolving. Epictetus said, It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Reflection is what humbles us. It reminds us that there's always more to see, always more to uncover, always more to become. Some nights reflection feels like peace. Other nights it feels like discomfort. Both are part of the process, because clarity isn't always comforting. Sometimes it shows you things you weren't ready to face, but the beauty of night is that it allows you to face them gently. You're not performing, you're not defending, you're just noticing, breathing, softening into the truth of who you were today, and deciding who you want to be tomorrow. Carl Jung wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." And he was right. When you reflect, you come face to face with your own shadow, not to be haunted by it, but to understand it, to befriend it, to stop pretending it doesn't exist. Because when you stop running from your inner world, you become more grounded in the outer one. You stop reacting to everyone's chaos because you've learned how to navigate your own. That's the paradox. Real power doesn't come from constant motion. It comes from intentional stillness, from choosing to observe yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, from building the habit of review, even when there's no immediate reward. But it has to be honest. Reflection doesn't work when it's filtered through ego or fear. It requires raw presence. You're not trying to be perfect. You're not trying to win. You're just asking, where was I today? Where was I true? Where did I act from fear? Where did I avoid discomfort? What would I do differently? Not out of shame, but out of alignment. These aren't punishments. They're portals. They give you access to self-correction without self-rejection. That's what most people miss. Reflection isn't about tearing yourself apart. It's about gathering the pieces and understanding how they fit. It's not about how many mistakes you made. It's about how many you're willing to learn from. And when done consistently, this process builds something quiet and unshakable, self-trust. Because the more you reflect, the more you begin to know yourself. Not the image you project, not the roles you play, but the deeper self, the one who watches everything, the one who isn't trying to impress, but to grow. That's where integrity is formed, in the shadows, not the spotlight. And wisdom isn't loud, it's patient, it's silent, it's formed in the moments where no one is watching, where you're alone with your thoughts and you decide not to run. You decide to stay, to breathe, to listen, and then to carry that clarity forward, one day at a time. This doesn't require hours. Sometimes all it takes is 5 minutes before sleep, a few questions, a little silence, a willingness to see yourself without filters. That's how the Stoics lived, not by pretending to be emotionless, but by cultivating emotional clarity. They didn't react impulsively because they had already rehearsed their values in solitude. They had already examined their ego, their fears, their desires. So when life tested them, they didn't crumble. They responded with reason. You can do the same. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing. Willing to look within. Willing to sit with what arises. Willing to admit where you were small and where you were strong. And when you do, you'll notice something profound. The more you reflect, the less you react. The more you understand yourself, the less you're thrown off by others. The more you create space within, the more you find peace without. This is what the night is for. Not escape, but inquiry. Not judgment, but understanding. It's not about changing the past. It's about harvesting wisdom from it. It's about turning every interaction, every failure, every discomfort into something useful. Something that sharpens your character instead of weakening it. So the next time the day ends and the night wraps itself around you, pause before the scroll, before the noise, before the escape. Just breathe. Ask yourself, what did I learn today? What did I avoid? What did I cling to that I could release? What did I say that didn't come from truth? What did I feel that I need to sit with a little longer? These small questions don't require big answers, just honesty, just attention. And over time they become a rhythm, a ritual, a return to the self that isn't performing but evolving. The night is a gift, a chance to reset not just your body but your being, to trade distraction for depth, to let your mind unfold without the pressure to fix. And when you choose to reflect, when you choose clarity over comfort, you start to wake up differently. You carry more calm, more presence, more strength, not because you forced it, but because you earned it in silence. And that, in the end, is the mark of someone on the path. Someone who doesn't just go through life reacting to everything outside of them, but someone who reflects deeply, responds wisely, and evolves quietly, one night at a time. Even in a world that never stops moving, where everything feels like a race towards success, recognition, perfection, there's something deeply human about exhaustion. And yet, we treat rest like a luxury, like something you're only allowed to have once you've done everything right, once the checklist is complete, once the world applauds you. But the truth is much quieter. You don't need to be perfect before you rest. You only need to be human. The body doesn't ask for your resume before it gets tired. It simply signals that it's done enough for today, that maybe, just maybe, your value isn't tied to how productive you've been. But so many of us resist that message. We override it. We push through. We whisper to ourselves that we haven't earned rest yet, that we need to prove something first, that we're not worthy of peace until we've conquered the mountain. But who decided that? There's a strange pride in exhaustion nowadays, in being busy, in showing how little sleep you get, how many hours you've worked, how much you've sacrificed. But beneath that pride, there's often a quiet desperation, a fear of being seen as lazy, weak, or falling behind. So we chase an imaginary finish line, one that moves further the closer we get. But Marcus Aurelius, one of the most disciplined minds in history, wrote in his journal at night, "Don't let your reflection on the whole sweep of life crush you. Don't fill your mind with all the bad things that might still happen. Stay focused on the present situation." Even he, a Stoic emperor, had doubts. Even he needed to tell himself to rest his thoughts. And that's the key. Rest is not a passive thing. It's not idleness. It's not giving up. It's an active choice to honor your limits, to say, "I've done what I could today, and that's enough for now." You rest so you can wake up with clarity, so your actions come from purpose, not panic, from calm, not chaos. When you allow yourself to rest, even while the world keeps spinning, you reclaim your autonomy. You're no longer chasing, you're choosing. But so many of us fear that pause, because in stillness, all the noise we've been outrunning catches up. The self-doubt, the regret, the unanswered questions. That's why we scroll instead of breathe, work late instead of reflect, keep moving instead of feeling. We think rest will make us weak, but it's often in stillness where we rediscover our strength. Sometimes rest looks like sleep. Other times it's as simple as stepping away from the internal pressure. The voice in your head that says, "You should have done more." That voice isn't you, it's conditioning. It's years of being told your worth is measured in output. But what if your worth is actually revealed in how you carry your quiet moments, in how gently you treat yourself when no one's watching? What if the real transformation doesn't happen in the hustle, but in the pause? And to become anything meaningful, you need space. Space to reflect. Space to let the day settle. Space to forgive yourself for what didn't go perfectly. Perfection isn't the goal. Presence is. And presence can't be reached by force. It comes when you let go of the need to control every outcome, when you allow life to breathe without constant intervention. You don't train a tree to grow by pulling on its branches. You make sure it has sunlight, water, space. The same is true for you. Your mind, your emotions, your goals, they grow in an environment of care, not punishment. That environment begins with rest, with stepping back so you can see clearly, with honoring the moment, not because it's impressive, but because it's yours. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future." Yet we delay happiness. We tell ourselves we'll rest once we've fixed everything, once we've become the ideal version of ourselves. But that version keeps changing. It's never satisfied. You don't rest because you've earned it. You rest so that you can keep becoming, so that you have the clarity to see what matters. So you don't burn the bridge to yourself in pursuit of something external. Sleep isn't just physical repair. It's a psychological reset, a spiritual reminder that even the most complex systems, like your mind, need darkness to integrate the light. During the day, you perform, you carry roles, you solve. But at night, the masks fall, the applause stops, and what's left is just you. Not the version the world sees, but the one that feels, the one that remembers, the one that knows when it's time to let go. Rest doesn't ask for perfection. It invites imperfection to settle, to soften, to be seen without being judged. Most people are so used to criticizing themselves that they don't even notice it anymore. Their internal dialogue sounds like a disappointed parent. But reflection isn't about self-blame. It's about self-awareness, about being honest without being cruel. Socrates reminded us, beware the barrenness of a busy life. And that's the trap, being so full of motion that you forget to feel, being so focused on becoming better that you forget to be. But it's not your productivity that makes you worthy, it's your being. And being requires rest. You are allowed to rest when you feel tired. You're allowed to pause even when there's more to do. You're allowed to say, I need space to think, to breathe, to reconnect. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's choosing to live by design, not default. That's honoring your human nature, not the machine the world wants you to be. So if today didn't go as planned, if you made mistakes, forgot something important, fell short of your own standards, it's okay. You're not your failure. You're not your task list. You're not the version of yourself that stumbled today. You're the one who showed up anyway, who tried, who noticed. And noticing is where change begins. Sleep tonight, not as an escape from the day, but as a reunion with your center. Let the noise settle, let the narratives fade, let your body speak, and let your spirit respond. Not with judgment, not with force, but with quiet recognition that rest is not a break from growth. It's part of it. It's the invisible root of every strong decision, every clear insight, every act of true presence. And tomorrow, you'll rise not because you forced yourself through exhaustion, but because you honored your need to stop. That's the paradox. When you stop chasing rest like a trophy, it becomes a tool, a foundation, a sanctuary. The world will still be there when you wake, but you, clearer, calmer, more grounded, you will meet it differently, not to prove anything, not to catch up, but to walk forward as someone who understands that perfection isn't the price of peace. Presence is, and peace begins with rest. There's something sacred about repetition, something timeless in the quiet simplicity of doing a small thing every day with intention. And yet, in a world that glorifies efficiency, we forget that rituals aren't just things we do. They're reminders of who we are trying to become. When the day has tested you, drained you, scattered your focus across 1,000 different thoughts, it's the small, repeated acts, one quote, one breath, one honest line in a journal, that call you back home, back to center, back to something steady. These aren't just habits. They aren't productivity hacks. A habit is brushing your teeth. A ritual is placing your hand on your heart before sleep and reminding yourself, I'm still here. I'm still learning. I haven't given up. The difference is soul. The difference is meaning. A ritual has memory stitched into it. It remembers why you began. And it doesn't need to be grand or impressive. Sometimes the most powerful rituals are invisible to the world, but essential to your inner life. There's a quiet dignity in showing up for yourself when no one's watching, not for performance, not for validation, but because the repetition becomes your root system. You do it even when the day breaks you, especially then. Because a ritual isn't about how strong you feel. It's about reminding yourself of your direction when you feel lost. It's not for when everything is going right. It's what keeps you together when everything is falling apart. Carl Jung wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And in that, we begin to see why rituals matter more than declarations. Anyone can speak of change. But the person who lights the same candle every night to signal reflection, who returns to the same quote, not for novelty, but for grounding, that person is building something real, a structure, a sanctuary. Think of the way the Stoics lived. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, wrote in his journal like a student, every night anchoring his thoughts, correcting his ego, reconnecting with virtue. Not because he had time to spare, but because he understood the chaos of power. He needed those words, that ritual, that practice of inner balance, and so do we. Especially now, in an age of endless noise and distraction, where our attention is pulled in every direction except inward. That's what rituals do. They shrink the gap between who you were today and who you want to be tomorrow. They don't rush, they don't force, they repeat gently, steadily, and in that repetition, they build trust, not with the world, with yourself. The trust that says, I might not have control over everything, but I do have this one action, this one reflection, this one breath. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Some nights, your journal might just hold a single sentence. Some nights, the quote might not sink in. But you do it anyway, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. And over time, the ritual doesn't just become familiar, it becomes a part of your identity. A lighthouse in your mental fog, a signal to your unconscious mind that no matter how unpredictable life gets, there is still order, there is still rhythm. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That's the function of a ritual. It's the doing, the becoming, the small step that aligns with your ideal, even when everything feels off track. Because the truth is, most of life won't go according to plan. You'll lose focus, get overwhelmed, feel unmotivated. But if your foundation is built on a few deeply personal rituals, ones you return to not out of obligation, but out of meaning, then storms don't break you. They pass through you. One breath before sleep, a moment of gratitude, even when it's hard. A question in your journal. What did I learn today? Not to judge, not to punish, but to witness, to see yourself without distortion. These aren't tasks, they're mirrors. And the more consistently you return to them, the clearer the reflection becomes. But more than habit, excellence is built in how you honor what you do repeatedly. You could rush through the day, check every box, win every argument, but if you end your night disconnected from yourself, what was the point? And yet, a single moment of awareness, a single evening ritual, can realign the whole trajectory of your mind. You don't have to be spiritual to have spiritual anchors. You just need intention, a reason, a rhythm. And you don't need to wait for a new chapter to begin. Your rituals begin now, in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the decision to return to yourself again and again, even when you don't feel like it, especially then. Because rituals aren't about how you feel, they're about what you believe you're capable of becoming. And belief grows when watered daily. Plato once said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." But self-conquest isn't a single battle. It's nightly, it's subtle, it's choosing over and over to come back to the page, the breath, the anchor, even when no one sees, especially then, because that's when it matters most. That's when the ritual becomes your quiet declaration. I haven't given up. I'm still building. It's easy to underestimate small things. One sentence, one pause, one line in a notebook. But small doesn't mean weak. Small means focused. And focused things pierce deeply, like rain shaping stone, like words etching identity. Over time, these small rituals don't just guide your night. They shape your days, your temperament, your decisions. They teach you to hold yourself steady, even in uncertainty. And in remembering, you build resilience, not the kind that looks tough on the outside, but the kind that survives long winters, that endures criticism, that learns how to self-regulate. Rituals aren't about avoiding discomfort. They're about being equipped to face it, not emotionally homeless in the storm, but rooted, anchored by your own inner consistency. A ritual reclaims time, not in hours, but in meaning. It turns minutes into milestones. It takes the overlooked moment and makes it sacred, because every night you return to your anchor, you remind yourself, I don't need to control everything. I just need to show up here, fully, honestly. So start small, breathe with awareness, reflect with compassion, write without performance. Let the ritual be quiet, and let its strength speak over time. Because the character that survives storms isn't built in a single act. It's formed in repetition, in choosing again and again to align your actions with your values, even when no one's watching. Especially then, that's how you become unshakable, not suddenly, not loudly, but through ritual, one sacred step at a time. There's a quiet intelligence in stillness, not the kind that shouts or performs, but the kind that listens, beneath the noise, beneath the striving. We're taught to hustle, to grind, to solve every problem by doing more. But what if some answers only arrive when you stop trying to force them? What if the mind, when allowed to rest, begins to do its deepest work, not in chaos, not in urgency, but in silence? At night, when the world finally loosens its grip and the demands go quiet, there's a subtle shift. Your conscious mind slows, but your inner world does not sleep. It rearranges, reorganizes, integrates. All the lessons from the day, all the impressions you took in, all the emotions you didn't have time to process, this is when they rise. But not to overwhelm you, to be understood, to find their rightful place. You don't always need more effort. Sometimes you just need to let go of effort altogether. It feels almost unnatural at first, to stop fixing, solving, optimizing. We're conditioned to equate progress with movement. But stillness is not the absence of motion. It's the presence of alignment. And that alignment deepens when you stop clenching mentally, when you stop bracing against the day. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And so often, our resistance to rest, our resistance to surrender, becomes the very thing that keeps us stuck. We imagine we're in control, pushing ourselves toward transformation, when in reality, our grasping is what's blocking the change. The Stoics knew this deeply, that the mind, like nature, thrives when given space to self-correct. You plant a seed, you water it, but you don't stand over it yelling, "Grow." You trust the soil. You trust time. The same is true for thought. When you stop trying to extract answers like a machine and instead create a sanctuary for reflection, the insights begin to surface on their own, gently, unexpectedly, like clarity rising through still water. This is the wisdom of sleep when properly honored, not just physical recovery, but psychological renewal, a nightly return to center. The subconscious is not idle. It's observing you all day, watching what you prioritize, where your attention flows, what you fear, what you ignore. And when the lights go off, it begins to speak. But it won't shout over your distractions. It waits for stillness, for space. And when it's given room to breathe, it begins to integrate what your conscious mind could not. We spend so much of our lives trying to push things forward. Careers, relationships, even our personal growth. But the irony is, real transformation often doesn't respond to pressure. It blooms in presence, in reflection, in silence. Seneca said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And many people live like that, constantly in motion, yet nowhere truly present. Rest, real rest, is the opposite. It is being fully here, not in the next task, not in the next solution, but in this breath, this moment, this allowing. Sometimes the deepest work your mind can do is what it does without you, not when you're planning or analyzing, but when you're simply being, lying in the dark, breathing slowly, letting your thoughts wander without needing to chase them. It's in those quiet, surrendered states that the connections are made. You realize what actually mattered about that conversation. You uncover why you were truly upset earlier. You begin to reframe your own narrative, not by force, but by flow. And the more you practice this kind of rest, not as escape, but as integration, the more effective you become during the day. It's not laziness, it's preparation. This is why some of the most creative insights appear in dreams, why solutions arise in the shower. It's not magic, it's mental spaciousness. You gave the mind a break from your control, and it responded by organizing itself. Because your inner world wants to evolve, it's wired to adapt, to grow, but not under force, under trust, under stillness. The best part is, this isn't something you need to earn. You don't have to achieve a certain status before rest becomes worthy. You don't have to be exhausted to deserve it. Rest is not a luxury, it's a strategy. A mind that doesn't rest cannot see clearly. It reacts, it misfires, it becomes foggy and defensive. But a mind that is given room to breathe, nightly, intentionally, starts to sharpen. It starts to discern. Socrates reminded us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. And that becoming doesn't only happen through effort, happens in the gaps. In the quiet hours when you're not striving to be someone new, but simply allowing yourself to be. And in that being, the transformation unfolds organically. You don't need to force it. You just need to stop resisting it. We often confuse rest with idleness, but true rest is active in a different dimension. It's where the subconscious begins to test new frameworks, where your values are quietly rearranged, where emotional healing begins to settle, where you start to notice the parts of yourself you've neglected. And if you give yourself the patience to let the mind work while the body rests, you wake up different, not just physically recharged, but mentally aligned. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire yet still turned inward for clarity, wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." That's what real rest is. Not an escape from the world, but a return to your own center. And it's in that return that your direction becomes clear again. You don't just wake up with energy, you wake up with vision. So when you lie down at night, try something different. Instead of spiraling through what's undone, try trusting that some answers don't come through control. Let go of the mental checklist. Stop trying to outthink your exhaustion. And just listen to the rhythm of your breath, to the wisdom beneath your fear, to the mind that in stillness begins to guide you toward who you were always becoming. And if you feel like nothing is happening, good. That's the point. Stillness isn't the absence of change. It's the soil where change takes root, where your intentions sink beneath the surface and start becoming habits, where your experiences begin shaping beliefs, where, slowly but surely, your inner compass recalibrates. You don't need to chase transformation. You just need to stop outrunning it. Create space. Give your mind room to unfold. Let the unconscious rearrange the pieces. And when morning comes, don't be surprised if you see things differently. That's the gift of true rest. Not just energy, but clarity. Not just stillness, but depth. Let the mind work while you rest. It knows what to do. All it needs is space. Of course. Here's an additional section that seamlessly continues the tone, pacing, and philosophical depth of the script while circling back to the core theme, letting the mind work while you rest. This brings the total close to your 1,700-word target. But here's what most people miss. Rest isn't passive, it's an art. And like any art, it has to be practiced with intention. You don't just fall into meaningful rest by accident. You create the conditions for it. You turn off the noise before the world does. You choose your last thought before sleep instead of letting fear pick it for you. You shape your mental environment the way an architect shapes a room, not cluttered with unfinished worries, but arranged with purpose. Even a single line in a journal can serve as an instruction to the unconscious. A message that says, "This is what matters now. Let go of the rest." And over time, that tiny habit becomes transformative. Your mind begins to recognize the boundary. It stops carrying chaos into your sleep. It stops dragging unfinished battles into your dreams. You stop waking up already at war with yourself. That's what so many people overlook. Your quality of rest doesn't just affect your mood, it affects your identity. If every night you fall asleep in panic, doubt, or resentment, that becomes the climate of your inner world. And no vision grows in that climate. But when you treat rest as sacred, when you make stillness a ritual, you create space for clarity to breathe. But the beauty of rest is that it opens the door between those two worlds. It invites the unconscious to speak, not with words, but with subtle reconfigurations. A shift in how you feel about something, a calm where there used to be tension, a sudden sense of knowing, without logic, without proof, that you've outgrown something. This is why some people can wake up and simply know it's time to move on, or forgive, or start. The decision wasn't made in the light. It was made in the quiet. And that quiet wasn't empty. It was full of inner work, restructuring, healing, letting go, all of it happening beneath the surface while they slept. This is why resisting rest is so dangerous. You're not just skipping recovery, you're blocking the inner transformation that only happens when you finally stop. Think about how different your life could look if you began to treat rest as a tool, not a weakness. If you saw it not as a break from progress, but as part of the progress. If you trusted that silence is not absence, it's presence in another form, a deeper form, the kind that allows wisdom to speak. That's the real power of letting the mind work while you rest. You're not escaping life. You're stepping into the part of yourself that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The part that already knows who you are becoming. The part that doesn't panic or force, but simply waits for space. Let that be your practice tonight. Not exhaustion, not collapse, but chosen stillness. Give the mind its canvas and let it paint, quietly, faithfully, unseen, but not unfelt. Stillness isn't just the absence of noise. It's not just quiet. It's presence, pure, undiluted presence. And in a world that's addicted to volume, distraction, and movement, Stillness becomes almost alien. Yet it's in that rare, undisturbed space that something honest begins to emerge. You can feel it when you lie in bed after the chaos of a long day. The room is silent, the phone is finally put down, and your breath becomes the only sound left. And that's when it happens. Not the kind of noise that comes from outside, but the one from within. Thoughts rise, feelings that were ignored all day surface. But if you don't panic, if you don't rush to distract yourself again, something incredible unfolds. The noise within slowly begins to quiet, and the deeper signals of your being start to speak. These signals aren't loud, they don't beg, but they're powerful. They've been waiting all day to get through to you, and they only show up once the world stops demanding your attention. This is why true wisdom rarely shouts. It waits. It waits until you are still enough to hear it. You don't find this kind of wisdom in noise, not in the podcasts you play to fill the silence, not in the scrolling that numbs the discomfort, and not in the next motivational video that floods your senses with artificial urgency. This wisdom doesn't arrive in the form of tips or strategies. It arrives in the form of clarity, the kind that doesn't just inform your mind, but grounds your soul. You begin to realize that you're not tired because of how much you did today. You're tired because of how many pieces of yourself you scattered trying to keep up with the noise of others. You wore masks, you adjusted your tone, you bent your priorities to avoid confrontation. And now, in the stillness, your real self steps forward, asking gently to be reclaimed. Stillness is a mirror, but it doesn't reflect the image you show the world. It reflects what the world keeps pulling you away from, your essence. And at first, it's unsettling, because the image is not always pretty. It's raw, it's tired, it's honest. But if you stay there long enough, if you resist the urge to edit or escape, something sacred begins to take shape. A soft inner voice that isn't asking for applause. It's asking for attention, not from the world, from you. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Stillness doesn't just give you space to look inside, it gives you permission. Permission to stop performing, permission to stop fixing, permission to finally sit with the parts of you that don't need to be improved, just heard. And what you'll find is that most of your suffering didn't come from events. It came from your reactions, from how fast you rushed to judge, to explain, to control. But in stillness, you see that many of those reactions were unnecessary. You didn't need to win every argument. You didn't need to defend your worth to someone who never saw it. You didn't need to chase clarity in places that only gave you confusion. Epictetus wrote, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." Stillness helps you break that complicity. It helps you become the kind of person who doesn't react just because the world expects you to. It teaches you to pause, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. That's the thing about stillness. It's not passive, it's powerful. It doesn't mean you're doing nothing. It means you're doing the one thing everyone avoids, facing yourself without distraction. You begin to listen differently, not just to your thoughts, but to your body, to the subtle tension in your shoulders that's been there for weeks, to the breath you've been unconsciously holding every time you open your inbox, to the quiet ache of something you've been postponing, not because it's hard, but because you've forgotten how to just be with it. And this listening isn't about fixing, it's about honoring the truth that your nervous system has limits, that your emotions are messengers, not mistakes, and that your mind, when left undisturbed, is capable of incredible insight. And when the imagination is overstimulated, it doesn't create solutions, it creates storms. But stillness calms that storm. It doesn't erase your thoughts, it gives them structure. It turns spinning into sorting. It turns spirals into stepping stones. It takes all the noise and gently asks, what really matters? And what often comes up in response is not a to-do list, but a to-be list. Be present. Be kind to yourself. Be aligned with what your soul actually respects, not what the algorithm rewards. Stillness won't tell you what to do next, but it will remind you who you are when you're not trying to impress anyone. And slowly, you begin to notice something different about yourself. You become less reactive, less frantic, less addicted to the next notification, the next opinion, the next crisis. Because you've started building a home within, one that isn't shaken every time someone doesn't understand you, one that isn't drained every time you give without boundaries. Stillness builds a spine, and not the kind that flexes with aggression, but the kind that stands tall with quiet certainty. There is something deeply transformative about ending your day in silence, not forced silence, chosen silence. You light a candle, maybe write a line in your journal, maybe just sit and breathe for 5 minutes longer than you normally would. And in that time, the day finds closure. Not the rushed kind that comes from exhaustion, but the intentional kind that comes from reflection. Your nervous system thanks you. Your subconscious thanks you. Even your future self thanks you, because now it doesn't have to carry the weight of today's chaos alone. Stillness isn't glamorous. It's not dramatic. No one sees it. No one applauds it. But it is sacred. It's where transformation actually happens. Not in the breakthroughs you announce to the world, but in the quiet, consistent moments you offer to yourself, where no one is watching, where nothing is expected, where you finally stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, who am I when I'm not doing anything? And that answer, once it finds you, changes everything. You begin to rest differently. You start to see rest not as a reward, but as a return. You stop earning it, and you start receiving it. You begin to understand that the deepest kind of rest isn't physical. It's psychological. It's the kind that happens when you no longer carry conversations in your head that should have ended days ago. When you no longer rehearse arguments with people who don't even remember the conflict. When you finally choose peace, not because everything is solved, but because not everything needs to be. And as you lay your head on the pillow tonight, remember this. You don't need to fix everything before you sleep. You don't need to conquer every fear, explain every emotion, or resolve every loose end. You just need to be still. Let the noise fade. Let the breath deepen. Let the presence return. Because in that stillness, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not lacking. You are simply home. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Some of the most important changes in your life are happening when you're not even paying attention. Not during the motivational sprints, not during the endless planning sessions, but in the background, quietly, automatically, when your conscious mind finally steps aside. See, your future isn't just something you chase while you're awake. It's something that's constantly being constructed while you sleep, while you rest, while you reflect. And the mind is always working. Even in stillness, it's sorting, filtering, learning. What you feed it during the day becomes the raw material it processes during the night. That's why your habits matter. That's why your thoughts matter. Not just because of what they do in the moment, but because of what they whisper into the future. The beauty of the human mind is that it doesn't need to be constantly managed. It's not a machine that breaks down the second you let go. It's more like a garden. You plant the right seeds through exposure, intention, and attention. And then you allow the soil of silence to do the rest. We live in a world that glorifies action. Chase it, hustle harder, push through. But few understand the quiet force of preparation that happens underneath all that. It's not always visible. You don't always feel it, but it's there. When you've trained your mind properly, it begins to build a future you haven't even fully imagined yet. At night, when your eyes close and the external world fades, the internal one lights up. That's when your subconscious gets to work. It replays your memories, attaches meanings, reorganizes what you learned, and begins to make sense of the clutter. Your conscious mind can only hold a few thoughts at once. But your subconscious is limitless. It connects patterns, predicts outcomes, and subtly guides your behavior, often without you even noticing. And here's the important part. It's not your willpower that shapes the future. It's the alignment between your inner world and the environment you quietly allow to influence it. Most people live their lives reacting to invisible scripts, stories they didn't write, fears they didn't examine, habits they didn't question, and then they wonder why the same cycles keep repeating. But the moment you become intentional about what you expose your mind to, what you read, what you listen to, what thoughts you entertain, that's when the real shift begins. That's when the subconscious no longer becomes a mystery, but a silent ally, working behind the curtain to build the future you actually want. This doesn't mean controlling every thought. It doesn't mean forcing perfection. It means becoming more mindful of what you reinforce. If you constantly dwell on fear, the mind will find ways to validate it. If you train it to see opportunity, even in pain, it'll start to construct paths you never noticed before. You don't have to micromanage your growth. You don't need 1,000 new habits. You just need consistency with the few that truly matter. The ones that feed your mind instead of flood it. The ones that calm your system instead of overstimulate it. Because whatever you rehearse internally, even silently, your life will start to reflect externally. That's why evening reflection is so powerful. A short walk, a moment of gratitude, a few honest questions before bed. You're not trying to fix everything. You're simply offering your mind better ingredients to cook with while you're unconscious. And when you wake up the next day, you might not even realize how much has shifted. But your reactions feel calmer. Your decisions seem clearer. That's not luck. That's preparation. Your mind is more malleable than you think. It's always listening, always learning. Not just when you're intentionally focused, but even when you're zoning out, scrolling, or letting your guard down. And so, the question becomes, what are you letting in? Not just in the big moments, but in the ordinary ones. Because it all counts. The music you play, the people you talk to, the thoughts you tolerate. Your mind isn't judging what's good or bad. It's absorbing whatever is repeated. And those repetitions shape the beliefs that shape the choices that shape your future. Seneca once said, "Fate leads the willing and drags along the unwilling. But in the quiet hours of the night, you get to decide which one you'll be, willing or resistant, willing to let go of old narratives, willing to surrender control without giving up direction, willing to trust that a mind properly trained doesn't need constant supervision. It knows where to go, it knows what to avoid, because you've already done the real work, not just of learning, but of becoming the kind of person whose life aligns naturally with their values, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. You don't always need more energy, more hustle, more discipline. Sometimes you just need better alignment. And alignment doesn't happen when you're overwhelmed. It happens when you pause, when you sit in the discomfort of not knowing and choose to plant the right thoughts anyway. You might not see results today or tomorrow, but the mind remembers. The subconscious stores it. And slowly, like light rising through the cracks, the future begins to take shape in a way that feels less forced, more free, less desperate, more directed. This is how the mind prepares you without you knowing, not with noise, not with fanfare, but with slow, steady integration. You read something months ago, and suddenly it clicks during a conversation. You faced something painful weeks back, and now you find yourself reacting with grace instead of fear. You wrote a small affirmation on a paper, and now it echoes in your choices without needing to be shouted. These are the quiet victories that come from trusting the process, from feeding the mind well and letting it do what it was designed to do: heal, connect, evolve. The mind becomes excellent the same way the body does, through repetition. But not just any repetition, conscious repetition. The kind that doesn't seek perfection but presence. The kind that isn't motivated by fear but by clarity. And that clarity starts to seep into every area of your life. Your speech becomes more intentional, your emotions more balanced, your relationships more grounded. Not because you forced it, but because you prepared for it. And that's the power of night, of dreams, of stillness. Not as a pause in your growth, but as a hidden continuation of it. You don't need to do more. You need to give space for what you've already done to settle. You need to trust that your mind, when nurtured with wisdom, will lead you even when you're not consciously steering. That's not laziness. That's intelligence, the kind that recognizes the difference between control and confidence, between panic and preparation. The doing part. That comes easier when your mind is already working in the background, quietly building pathways, quietly removing obstacles,